When it comes to character design in video games, sexualization is an aspect of the conversation that usually isn't super productive in videos on YouTube. My first experience with it personally was with Mortal Kombat 9, which is a game I loved in no small part due to the costume designs. They were objectively pretty stupid for a fighting tournament, especially for the women who got dressed up like this when they were princesses and assassins, but I don't know. I say this from the perspective of someone who isn't into women, I just thought they looked cool. So much so that I even got art of my model in Melina's MK9 outfit, which I think I pulled off pretty well. However, I also wasn't really upset when they changed it up for Mortal Kombat X. I didn't like the art style as much, but it was mostly just because I prefer the gaudier, campier, more over-the-top aesthetic of 9. And the debate around Mortal Kombat 9 and Mortal Kombat X is one that shows up in a lot of the most mind-melting video game discourse out there. Namely, the over-sexualization of women in gaming. However, I think that's a subject that's been beaten to death a bit. Or at least, I'm not someone who has very much to add. I'm a man who's not attracted to women, so I really have no dog in that fight. And while I support the women who do talk about this subject with the nuance it deserves because I do think it's an important one, I don't think there's very much unique that I can offer to that discussion. However, where I can speak with some authority is on sexualization in the context of male character designs. I can come at this from the perspective of someone who is a man, who is attracted to men, and who has actually had to design a character with this at least partially in mind. And is also just an aspect of the discussion that I think is frankly woefully underdiscussed and even more woefully misunderstood, as demonstrated by the discourse from the Marvel Rivals fanbase that insisted that this new Emma Frost skin is basically the same thing as this new Iron Fist skin. Please be serious. Or maybe don't. I got multiple hit tweets out of it. I'll take it. Anyways, that's what I want to talk about today. There's clearly a real lack of understanding about what it means for an outfit to be sexualized, particularly in the context of male character design, so I want to dive into that here a bit. Also, hey, there's a very good chance that this video ends up being demonetized given the subject matter, so if this really tugs at the heart, or any of the other organs it pumps blood to, you should consider becoming a channel member on either YouTube or Patreon. Links to both are in the description. Part 1. Definitions, caveats, and biases. So, first things first, we should lay out some fundamentals before we dive too deeply into it, both in terms of some of my beliefs on the subject as well as some definitions. And the best place to start is with what it means for something to be sexualized. The very basic Oxford Dictionary definition is made sexual, given sexual associations, which is honestly not super helpful for our purposes because we also have to find a definition for sexual in order for it to mean anything. Oxford defines that as relating to the instincts, physiological processes, and activities associated with physical attraction or intimate physical contact between individuals. And while that's a flawed definition, it's at least something to start with. So basically, sexualizing something means to make that thing into something that relates to either arousal or sex. Importantly, sexualize is a verb. It is an action. It is something that you do to someone or something. In the context of character design, it's taking something that is not inherently sexual, such as a person, and using clothing, posture, personality, movement, and more to specifically make them sexual. Importantly, sexy and sexual are not synonymous. There's obviously a lot of overlap, but not everything that's sexy is sexualized, and not everything sexualized will be sexy. This is a hard concept to convey with just words, but I used this example on Twitter and it worked well enough, so we'll use it again here. Compare these two pictures. One of Walter White in his underwear and one of an Andrew Christian model in his underwear. These are both grown adult men wearing nothing but their underwear, at least as far as we can see, but I hope we can all agree that there is a clear difference between the two. They're both wearing briefs, but Walter's are saggy white tighty whities that are cut in a borderline diaper shape out of cheap fabric with a really thin waistband. They look like they came from Walmart. They are not designer. Not that Andrew Christian is designer, but you get what I mean. Compare that to the model in his underwear. Andrew Christian underwear has a pouch to accentuate the bulge, but it also has a lower waistband, a higher cut on the thighs, fabric that's meant to look more attention-grabbing with the reflective material, even if it does look a little bit trashy, but we'll get to that later, or maybe not at all, who knows. And a thicker waistband that literally says massive on it above the bulge in all caps. This is the very subtle difference between sexualized and non-sexualized clothing. They're both wearing underwear, and both are even technically wearing the same style of underwear, but Walter's underwear isn't sexualized, whereas the model's is. But it also goes beyond clothing. You can also compare the bodies, both as they are and how they're posed. The model is more slender and muscular for sure, but he's also oiled up, clean-shaven, posed in a more suggestive way, and mugging for the camera. None of those apply to Walter. He's got a pretty average body and is being presented in an average way. Arguably a little bit under average given that he looks like he's been hit by a bus. Remember again that sexualize is a verb. It is something we do to a character and not something immutable about them. A woman with a large chest might be sexy to you, but she is not inherently sexualized. She might choose to dress more provocatively to sexualize herself, but just because you find something sexy does not mean that it's sexualized. A male character might have a nice ass or a nice chest or a big dick or whatever else, but that's not inherently sexual. Those are just things the human body can have, and many characters in real life people have those attributes without being inherently sexualized. And again, sexualized and sexy are different things. If we changed Walter White's pose and expression here, we could sexualize him even if you still didn't find him hot. And you could do the same thing in reverse to the model to unsexualize him even if you still find him hot after the fact. We could swap their underwear or put the model in sweats and a t-shirt while putting Walter in a jockstrap. And regardless of which one you would find hotter, we'd be sexualizing Walter and not the model in that scenario. With that established, we also should touch on over-sexualization, which comes in two forms, the micro and the macro. On the micro level, we're talking about individual designs, and in that context, we're talking about a design that is more sexualized than contextually makes sense. A seductive character being sexualized makes sense. The royal guard being dressed the same as an incubus does not. On the macro level, we're talking about the overall presentation of characters, typically in terms of demographics. If every man is wearing a skimpy bodysuit that cuts in at the middle of the waist and ends in a thong and a prominent bulge, then that's broadly over-sexualization on the macro level, unless the game is taking place in a context where that might make sense, like a strip club. And even then, if every game featured men in a strip club wearing something like that, we'd also recognize that as over-sexualization, even if not literally every level in every game was like that. Now, I should probably establish my own position on this stuff, since that'll obviously bias my perspective and influence how you interpret what I'm saying. My personal opinion is that there's nothing inherently wrong or bad about a character's design being sexualized regardless of gender, provided that it actually works for the character. I don't think every man needs to be slutted out, and I feel the need to say that because every time I talk about this, I get some weirdo who insists that that's all I want. I think there are a lot of straight men who assume that sexualizing men means doing to men what they enjoy doing to women but wouldn't enjoy having done to themselves, but I don't think that's the solution here. And not to not all straight men here, but I'm not talking about all straight men. I'm talking about the kind of people who thought Stellar Blade was Game of the Year right up until censorship took away Eve's animated titties by slightly covering her up a bit more in a handful of outfits. I think a lot of straight guys, even if they might not advocate for it actively, would enjoy playing characters who were a little bit more confident about how they looked. This video is about men in this context, but to clarify, I don't think it's bad if women's designs are sexualized. There's also often an assumption that being critical of over-sexualization is synonymous with assuming sexualization is inherently bad, and that's not a position I agree with either. It is bad if that's the default for every woman, because not only is it annoying when people act like the purpose of all video games is just to turn them on, it's also just really boring when that's the lens through which all female character design is perceived. It makes sense for characters like Melina or Emma Frost, but less so for Katana and Sue Storm. Making it the default means that sexualization can't say something about a character because there's no contrast, when in reality, with proper contrast, it really can. Sexualizing a male character can convey confidence, it can convey something about his personality, it can tell you which of his assets he views as his most impactful and important by highlighting them, and it can put him in direct contrast with more modest characters. If every man was being sexualized, then sexualization would lose its ability to tell us something about any of them, which is counterproductive. I also am coming at this from the selfish perspective of wanting hot men to look hot, and I'm not afraid to admit that. It is frustrating to know that if there is a female one-to-one equivalent of Johnny Storm with the same cocky personality revolving around knowing she's hot, we would have nearly immediately gotten an outfit for her that embraced that and let her show off her body along the lines of the skins that Psylocke, Sue Storm, and Emma Frost have gotten. Likewise, a male version of Widowmaker absolutely would not get the same seductive character design elements as part of his design, even though there's no real reason why the seductive but deadly man trope can't be deployed more often. It's pretty inarguably a more realistic trope than the femme fatale. I want to play RPGs where my charismatic mage or bard or whoever else doesn't have to be drowning in 3 layers of some boring ass outfit that doesn't show off his body. I want to be able to play as male characters who want to look hot and show it off because to me that is part of the power fantasy of gaming. I want those characters to exist as NPCs, party members, and enemies because to me that would just be more fun. And I recognize that not every man or every gamer feels that as part of the fantasy, or at least not a primary part. But I also don't think that that means it's fair that the most I'm allowed to hope for is fan art or predatory gay gacha games if I want to fulfill that fantasy when straight men are absolutely drowning in ways to fulfill so many of these aspects of their own fantasy. So, to clarify, this video is not going to argue that we should revert to some puritanical anti-sexuality position where every character needs to be dressed like they're afraid of God's judgment. That would be boring. It's also not going to argue for the over-sexualization of male characters, either in general or specifically in terms of this whole leveling the playing field thing. I personally think that sexualization needs to be done better regardless of gender, and when it comes to men specifically, I think it should be done more because it's a missed opportunity when it's never on the table. Anyways, enough preamble, we've laid the foundation. Now it's time to start building the house. Part 2. Can you even do that? Well, let's say for the sake of argument that you are in favor of sexualizing male characters. You might then ask if that's even realistically possible or how to do it. On a more societal level, you might argue that it is impossible for a man to be truly sexualized and objectified under patriarchy, but that's kind of a boring answer and also isn't really true. Yes, it is impossible for sexualization to affect men and women the exact same way, and the connotations of sexualization will be different because of gender, but that doesn't mean we can't still slut up a man. Queer men in particular will be very familiar with how objectified, dehumanized, and sexualized a man can be, either by experiencing it themselves or by witnessing it done to others. Now, some people will say that I wouldn't be able to sexualize a man properly because I'm not the primary target of the sexualization of men, just purely based on the proportion of the population, because they assume that would be women who are attracted to men. This is, to me, kind of a moot point. Yes, there are differences in how gender affects sexualization on the side of the perceiver, but it is still possible to identify aspects of character design as being sexualized and do them well, even without being the majority target demographic. Like, gay men and straight women can still identify and replicate the sexualization of female characters. Those elements aren't exclusive to straight men. Likewise, plenty of lesbians would be able to design a character that is just as sexualized and attractive to the straight male audience as any other character. Like, let's be real. However, we do still have to reckon with gendered clothing. Certain styles of clothing are perceived as inherently feminine or masculine, and while that is not an immutable characteristic of clothing and is subject to change over time, that's not super helpful for discussing how it affects the here and now. A sports bra is an article of clothing that can be worn by anyone, but it will be perceived differently on a masculine body than a feminine one. As well, something that might sexualize a man to one person might make them look silly to another. A lot of people would find a man in thigh-high garters, high heels, and a maid dress to be silly rather than sexy. And even if those people are wrong, that doesn't change that sexualization of characters in media has to work around the existing biases we have around gender and clothing. However, this leads me to one of the more common mistakes I see on this subject. A lot of sexualized clothing is associated with femininity, but that isn't a natural law of the universe. It's just that we sexualize women more, so there are more advancements in that field, and they tend to be put in sexualized clothing more often. It's like the reverse of basically all fields of medicine, where women's bodies were not properly studied, and so medical research often is lacking, even in the present day, most famously on subjects like health related to periods. Beyond that, though, it's worth remembering that sexualization is not inherently feminine. A lot of sexualized clothing is associated with femininity because women are more frequently sexualized, but it's a bit more of a chicken and the egg situation than we often reckon with. And women don't own thigh highs and skimpy bodysuits and all that stuff. They don't have exclusivity over it. Those can be worn by men and made to look sexy, and it's possible to do so in a way that still accentuates the male body. With that in mind, though, one of the more common responses I got to my thread when I posted it was that my suggestions for sexualized outfits were just gay, and that's another interesting point. Sexualization is tied to sexuality. A female character is typically being sexualized for a straight guy's enjoyment, and the assumption is that the goal of sexualizing a male character would be to appeal to straight women or gay men and exclude straight men. But is that a good assumption? Even if it is, would those two groups be so different on this front? And actually, why do we think that in the first place? Sexualization of women appeals to straight men and queer women. It's just that queer women have a more complicated relationship with it because the sexualization is often tied to the objectification and dehumanization of women. And even if they might find a sexualized female character hot, it might also kill the buzz a bit to see how your gender is being objectified, especially since you know that it's being done for the audience of men that are watching or playing or whatever else. When we're sexualizing men, though, we have a very different dynamic going on. Men are not marginalized, objectified, or dehumanized in the way that women are, particularly when it comes to sexualization and all the related aspects of our lives. For a man, being sexualized is kinda just uncomplicated, relatively speaking. A sexualized man is someone who is doing so because he wants to, not because society sexualizes by default. When I see a hot male character, or the rare one who's being deliberately sexualized, there's no part of me that's like, I just wish men could be seen for something other than their fat asses and nice pecs. Or why is it that every man's outfit in this game is doing some insane magic to keep all his junk inside that tiny little Speedo? Queer men can enjoy sexualized men in a way that's a lot less complicated than how queer women can enjoy sexualized women, and it means that queer men have a more shared experience with women who are attracted to men than queer women have to men who are attracted to women. A sexualized man also doesn't tend to have to, justify his sexualization. A character like Bayonetta has to work hard as a character to own her sexualization, rather than to be owned by how she's sexualized and perceived. And Bayonetta's great, it's done really well, don't get me wrong on that. But that's not really something that a male character has to worry about. If we assume the reverse scenario, or a gender-bent Bayonetta, that character wouldn't probably have to prove that he's, more than just a pretty face. His sexuality might be called into question a lot more, but I mean, par for the course. Good things always get called gay. It's just how the world works. Think about how in Persona there is a succubus persona and an incubus persona. The succubus looks like this, and it makes pretty perfect sense. She's a succubus. There are few character concepts more suited to being presented as sexy and sexualized. But then you have the incubus, who looks like, well, a goblin with a horn on his dick. This ties into something I talked about earlier about how the over-sexualization of women and refusal to sexualize men puts us in a position where the female characters who should have a sexualized design like the succubus can't really stand out as sexualized, because that's also how a lot of non-sexual female characters are presented. And the male characters who should likewise be sexualized aren't, which means that you lose that part of their core concept as well as their connection to their counterpart. However, that's only half of this. We've got to go back to that whole "you just want him to look gay" thing, because that is really interesting. In that thread I talked about, I had initially pulled examples from Grand Blue Fantasy and Voice of the Cards, but hell, let's get even more ambitious here. New Carnival is a gay gacha game about some fantasy bullshit with a story that absolutely nobody remembers, where male characters are either sexualized by default or sexualized in specific outfits. Maybe most noticeably with Olivine breasting boobly all over the place. These characters are meant to be queer men for a queer male audience, and we can see that in which attributes are being highlighted here. Chest, ass, bulge, etc. There are a lot of hairless men, even when they're big lumberjack-looking motherfuckers. But it's not like the only games like this are for queer men. Love in Deep Space is famously only interested in being exclusively for women, and both the developers and female fans of the game are not shy about telling queer men that that is not a space for them. Importantly, none of the men in any of these games are dressed like that Iron Fist skin. Or at least, when they start to get close to that, you can tell there's a pretty clear difference in how they're presented. Also, crucially, plenty of women over time have been interested in fan service with male characters with either fruity undertones or outright homosexuality. Some women want their men to look masculine and manly and hairy and beefy and fit with all the, stereotypes, the expectations. And the same incidentally does go for queer men. Some women want their men to look more slender, and queer men do too. We have whole categories like twink and twunk and bear and otter and jock and all kinds of other terms for this sort of thing. And straight women's tastes aren't that far removed from queer men's. It's a trope, or at least it used to be, of all the hot ones are either gay or taken. Like, the things that gay men do to be attractive to other gay men also seem to at least somewhat affect straight women and pull them in too. In fact, the shared attraction is part of the reason why there's beef in fandoms between queer men and straight women over how men are being sexualized, especially in settings where the men are being sexualized by default. New Carnival fans would not respond well to fan art of Aiden or any of the other men with a woman, and Love and Deep Space fans do not respond well to art of Silas with any of the other boys either. Also can't go without saying that Fujoshis are in fact a thing, and they're frankly the thing that drives most fandoms. Fujoshis, for the unaware, are women who like it when the men are fruity, either in media's canon or in fanfiction. You can find them in every single fandom that's worth acknowledging, whether it's Transformers or Overwatch or Star Trek. Not every woman is into it, obviously, but it's still definitely a sizable amount. Plus, not every man is into the way women are sexualized, and that's never stopped anyone from doing it. Plenty of men who are into women will look at something like Brown Dust 2 and how they sexualize Queen of Beirut, Iron, Monarch, Wilhelmina, and think, this is kinda weird. Like, plenty of instances of sexualized women get to the point where it's just so over the top that it stops being sexy and starts just being comedic with the insane proportions and absurd presentation. The last big thing I'll mention in this section is that we're not used to seeing men sexualized in this way in general, which means it's hard to immediately categorize in the same way. We're just a lot more used to seeing women being sexualized like this, and it kind of makes it pass without notice compared to when we do the same thing to men. However, just because it's sometimes jarring to see a male character being sexualized doesn't mean that it's wrong or bad to do so. It's just not something we're used to. In the same way, just because we've normalized the over-sexualization of female characters doesn't mean that every instance of it is good just because it's what has been done. And I need Marvel Rivals fans in particular to be well aware of that, because that's been the excuse for stuff like the Malice skin, because, oh, that's just an old costume that's, faithful to how she used to look. Like, yeah, I know, that doesn't mean that it doesn't still look absurd on her. Anyways, with all of that said, let's get into the real meat of the topic here. Part 3. Sexualizing the male body. So we've been talking a lot about the theory of male sexualization, but good theory is nothing without good praxis. Part of what makes this discussion complicated is that the stuff that seems like the hard part, the stuff we've already covered, is actually a lot more simple than it seems. And the stuff that seems easy, just slutting out the men, is actually a lot more complicated than people seem to recognize. For one, men's body types aren't all going to be sexualized in the same ways, and while it's an oversimplification, it's helpful to break this down into a few categories to make the distinctions more obvious. Namely, twinks, hunks, and bears, each of whom has a different breakdown of muscle and body fat. A twink is generally defined by being low on muscle and body fat, typically a taller, more slender man with little to no body hair. Think Troye Sivan. A hunk is a man who's high on muscle but low on body fat, and is the most common body type for male superheroes in particular. Pick a man from Marvel Rivals and you'll probably find a hunk. Body hair is usually non-existent or minimal, especially when the goal is to make them look sexy, since muscle definition can be lost under hair. And also it's just easier on the artist if they don't have to try and, give a man good body hair. It's hard on them. Ask any artist, drawing body hair will ruin their wrists. A bear is a man with a fair bit of body fat, and who typically has muscles that are going to be noticeable but not necessarily defined. Like, bears don't have visible abs, but they often do have a fair bit of body hair. How we sexualize a twink will be very different than a bear, but it's important to remember that any body type can be sexualized, because no body type is inherently sexualized by default. They are all made that way by presentation and perception, and if we can do it to one of them, we can do it to everyone. Now, there's an assumption that showing skin equals sexualization, and while there's a correlation, it's not one-to-one. Showing skin can be a way to sexualize a character, but it's just not the only way. And it's especially important to remember that when it comes to men, since the skin that we are allowed to share by default is different than for women, and typically we're allowed to show a lot more of it without it looking sexualized. A man with a bare chest is not going to be perceived the same way as a woman with a bare chest, and this is without even getting into how non-binary people have an especially complicated relationship to this, given that sexualization is often tied to the binary. This is complicated further by the fact that you can't sexualize a twink's chest in the same way as a man who has either more fat, muscle, or both, or a hairless man's chest the same way as a man with a lot of body hair. The heart-shaped cutout on a Venturine's chest wouldn't work the same if we put it on a big, hairy bear, because it would be pushed out more from the body. It wouldn't show the smooth skin, hair might be protruding from it, and it might get stretched in awkward ways when it's not against a flat surface like a Venturine's cutting board of a torso. It's also important to reinforce here that just like how no singular body type is inherently sexualized, there are also no body types incapable of being sexualized. Media that does sexualize men will typically lean towards twinks and hunks because they're the easiest since they already fit more conventional models of attractiveness. But you can absolutely sexualize a fat man too. It's just in different ways. Like I said, showing skin is part of it, but proportionizing the body properly with clothing is a big part of it too. For a hunk with a big torso, you would want a shirt that accentuates the V shape of the torso, something that narrows at the waist and expands towards the chest, drawing attention to the fact that this is someone who's bulky, but that it's muscle, not fat. That could either be the literal cut of the outfit, like how the shape of it is built, or it could just be the patterns that are printed on it that give the same illusion. For a twink, you might want an outfit that accentuates their slenderness throughout, something that draws attention to both their slender waist and the fact that their chest, shoulders, and arms aren't significantly more broad. You might even want the outfit to kind of pull in towards the middle to try and counteract that, to maintain the slenderness throughout. You wouldn't want big, bulky sleeves, shoulders, anything like that. For a bear, you'd want the opposite. Instead of trying to slim them down in the waist, you're trying to follow the existing curves. You want to accentuate any roundness of the belly that there is, follow the curve of the chest, draw focus to the parts of the bear that you're trying to sexualize, and importantly, not try to hide the fat. You are embracing the fat, because that's very much so something that can be sexualized too. And if that idea sounds absurd to you, well, I appreciate you leaving more bears for the rest of us, and I promise there is a world of joy waiting for you the minute you stop gagging at the prospect of finding someone with a double-digit body fat percentage attractive. Importantly, this also extends to things like poses. The poses that sexualize a twink are going to rely more on them seeming live, agile, a bit more fluid in their movements. You want them to look slender, almost delicate. For hunks, you're looking for a more athletic stance, but one that still demonstrates coordination. Readiness, preparedness, muscles up front, standing up straight, walking with purpose, and being firm on their feet. To sexualize a hunk, you have to emphasize the sexual appeal of their muscles, so you want the posing to reflect that this is someone muscular who wants to show that off. Whereas for a twink, like I said, you're almost looking to communicate this delicateness, like the vibe that you could pick them up and throw them over your shoulder, or wrap your hands around their waist. For a bear, you'll want to lean into a pose that takes up space. They're not going to stand with their legs pressed together, arms at their sides, shoulders hunched in, because that's the opposite of what you're sexualizing about the bear. You're sexualizing their presence, their ability to fill that space. They are large, that's sexy, that's the point. I don't know if people remember this, but there was that meme a while ago that was like, when your boyfriend is 250 pounds, so he gets to decide when the cuddling ends. That is the energy you're trying to communicate when you sexualize a bigger man. That he's sexy because he's big. A twink is a body pillow, but a bear is a weighted blanket with perks. Body hair also deserves more of a mention here, because the default when trying to sexualize a man is usually just to shave it all off. But that's not necessarily because smooth equals sexy and hairy equals unsexy, obviously. Instead, I would argue that when it comes to sexualizing men, it's more about communicating intentionality. That this is a character who is deliberately trying to present himself in a way that he sees as sexy. He's not just going with the wind. If you wanted to sexualize a hairy man, you've got to make a choice on that front. Either it's well-groomed body hair, or it's going wild. If part of what you're emphasizing with him is that he's like a professional of some sort, some big masculine lawyer or doctor or king or something, well, well-groomed body hair is going to help emphasize that. But if you're emphasizing that he's more of a wild, free spirit, then going ungroomed can help with that too. Or at least the illusion of being ungroomed. In the same way that men think they like women without makeup because they wear like a subtle foundation and a subtle lip, if you're going to have a man be hairy and you're trying to sexualize that, you want to find a way to make it look like he's just kind of letting it all fly wherever it goes, but you do still want it to look proper, you know? You don't want it to actually be just an untamed forest. You might find it sexy if there's an untamed forest, but again, not the same thing. Being hairless also isn't going to be universally perceived as sexy either, because shaving your body communicates something to the audience. It'll invite them to see the body as less rugged, more defined, which is why it's often done for twinks and hunks. Hair makes lines fuzzier in general, whether it's on your head, your body, or your face. I mean, try tweezing your eyebrows and see how different your face looks if you doubt me. It's like putting your face on HD. And so if we're going for hairless, we're communicating that there is something defined that we want to show off. It also indicates a lot of effort. Most grown men grow a fair bit of body hair, so a man who's smooth is a man who spends a lot of time on it. And a man who's smooth and also not covered in razor bumps is a man who clearly knows how to take care of his skin. And this works really well for characters who are meant to give the vibe of being very particular about their appearance, like Lifeweaver, but it wouldn't work as well on a man like Soldier 76. Like, that kind of vanity just isn't really in his wheelhouse. I'm emphasizing the body so much up front because we can't even really talk about stuff like outfits until we've established this stuff. You need to understand that sexualizing a character isn't just showing as much skin as possible or only using one body type that is the sexy body type. Rather, it's about knowing your whole character's deal. Their body type, their personality, their behavior, all that stuff. A big fat hairy bear can be sexy as hell if designed right, and a beefcake can look awful if he's not. But now that we have established that stuff, time to move on to the outfits. Part 4. Playing dress up. Incidentally, it's actually pretty hard to find a lot of diverse sexualized male character designs that aren't just in not safe for work games, so instead of pulling up more new carnival characters, I decided to ask another group of people who have experience designing sexualized male characters. VTubers. I put out a call on Twitter for people to submit their designs for this and got a ton of very helpful responses that I'll be using in this section, and links to the VTubers mentioned and the artists who made the art they submitted will be in the description if you're curious. Anyways, we've got a lot to cover, so let's just get into it. And first things first, none of what I've said should be interpreted as me saying that showing skin can't be sexualized on men. It can be for sure. But remember the comparison earlier between Walter White and the Andrew Christian model. We've got to be smarter about this than just maximizing skin exposure. The first rule of sexualizing a character is that skin is like jazz. It's about what you aren't showing as much as what you are. A big part of what makes outfits like Melina's from Mortal Kombat 9 sexualized is that you're able to see so much of her, but she's still hiding the parts that you, the presumed straight male audience, really want to see the most. Probably wouldn't even be as hot if she was showing it. It's better that she's hiding it. You're getting so tantalizingly close, but not getting what you want, making the deliberate choice to stop showing right when you're getting to all the good stuff. And we have to keep that in mind here too for men. We can also do this without showing much skin though, or even any skin at all. Think about why people talk about gray sweatpants season. They're sexy because you can see bulge, even though they're about as full coverage as you can get. Tight-fitting clothing is also an option here, since it can hug the body and reveal muscles, or lack thereof if twinks are your type. You can also play with fabrics and textures to accentuate this. Gray sweatpants work because of how they drape over the body, but they're not really designed for it. If we really wanted to lean in, we could use stuff like satin or silk that would show a lot more in the outline. Or we could use materials like latex that both hug the skin and also have this reflective, shiny texture to them. You could use something translucent, like something holographic or iridescent, to allow for obscured visibility through the outfit, and if you wanted to be really bold, you could go the route of a nude illusion fabric. Mr. Coffin and Mr. Nail show both sides of this, and incidentally, excellent names for a VTuber couple, 12 out of 10 on that one, guys. Mr. Nail on the right is barely covered, only wearing a few pieces of jewelry, a bit of a cape, and a loincloth that hits the floor. He's showing a lot of skin, and what isn't showing is still being emphasized by both a visible bulge and a big golden arrow pointing at it. Mr. Coffin on the left shows us the opposite though. Very little bare skin is actually showing, but everything about the outfit emphasizes what skin is showing. The corset underlines the chest, while the top cuts a rounded shape around the top of the pecs to emphasize the shape, the roundness, the volume of them. The ripped mesh in the middle of the chest leaves the viewer with the implication that someone has torn it, and creates the illusion of a cutout even though the fishnet isn't covering anything anyways. The materials are shiny, with latex and polished leather being emphasized, and the pants, if you can even really call them that, are chaps that reveal another prominent bulge. Between the two of them, we have two very obviously sexualized designs that take dramatically different approaches to how you show skin. Another big element of this is cutouts in the outfit. In fact, this is kind of one of the best ways to do it. A crop top can just be a crop top. Short shorts can just be short shorts. Clothing isn't inherently sexualized just because of its length or how form-fitting it is, and so introducing cutouts can go a long way to making it clear what you're really trying to do here. For example, Bobacino uses cutouts in his model's armor on the stomach and thighs to show them off, while still using the armor itself to emphasize things like the chest, while B. Morningstar uses a wide chest cutout on a jacket that's otherwise fairly conservative. Balthazar Faust's top half looks like pretty typical leather armor that you might see in Skyrim or something, but the hip cutouts make it clear that this isn't just meant to be hot, but specifically sexualized. It's not incidental, it's intentional. In all three cases, a big advantage is that they allow the model to maintain a silhouette that incorporates elements of bigger clothing items while still allowing for sexualization. A big coat, heavy furs, or even a full-body cyberpunk suit of armor are all able to be modified to allow for this. Also, given how much we talked about body types in the last section, we should probably investigate that more here, using Valefor as our twink, Tenchi as our hunk, and Bo Astra as our bear. Valefor's design puts a ton of emphasis on the torso, namely on how slender and smooth it is. The crop top jacket highlights the chest with silver trim that draws inward to counteract the widening of the torso with the shoulders, and triangular shapes at the top of both pecs give the opposite effect of the rounded ones we saw in Mr. Coffin before by flattening out the chest. The tattoos on the torso all angle inward at the waist as well, giving this illusion of like a corset that's snatching his waist in even more. The whole design is meant to emphasize, again, that slenderness. Contrast that with Tenchi, whose design emphasizes muscularity. The jacket covers one pec but exposes the other, with rounded shapes again highlighting the size of it. Whereas our twink was wearing clothing that served to emphasize how slender he was, our hunks is emphasizing size. Muscles are on display as much as possible, with the bulky jacket serving to expand the silhouette around the arms to look even bigger, and the shorts being tight to highlight muscle definition. Then we get to Bo, whose design is, in his words, more of a bear/muscle daddy body type. The entire design emphasizes that he is massive, with a lot of skin showing. But unlike with Tenchi, it's not about definition as much as just raw size. Depending on the art, Bo doesn't have any defined muscles on the torso, but even when he does, it's usually very faintly defined. He's a beefy guy, but more in the vein of a football or rugby player than a hockey or baseball player. His belt is really thick, which draws attention to the size of the torso without really slimming his body. Instead, it's more reminiscent of a wrestling belt that demonstrates power more than anything else. The straps on the chest and legs evoke leather harnesses, and alongside the piercings, you get the vibe of those leather daddies that you see sometimes at Pride if you're lucky. The loincloth is shorter and wider than what we saw on Mr. Coffin 2, which also serves to reinforce the body shape. I'm putting a lot of emphasis on this in particular because when we talk about this stuff, the idea of sexualizing male characters with virtually any amount of body fat is seen as inherently kind of comical to a lot of people. Like, think about how people talk about Roadhog. And sure, it would probably look kind of silly if we dressed up Bo in Valefor's outfit. But Valefor would look silly in Bo's outfit too, right? The same goes for posture and pose. Valefor, Tenchi, and Bo are all posed in ways that reinforce their vibes. Valefor is leaning back with his legs together, while Tenchi is on his toes and clearly ready to move and throw some muscle around, while Bo's posture is more relaxed and casual with both feet, or hooves I guess, planted firmly on the ground with his shoulders relaxed. This is why it's important to accommodate body type in all this stuff. You can sexualize any body type provided you're willing to work with what you've got, and once you get over your baggage about body fat being inherently desexualizing on any body it's on, you'll realize how much you were missing out on in the world. Also, you'll like yourself more. Worth considering. Speaking of body type, we also want to remember that there are no hard and fast rules here. Julian Valentine, Scully Sinful, and Felix Santos are all meant to be these big buff men, but just look at how differently they're approaching it. Julian's design is flamboyant but very structured, reflecting the sort of playboy, party boy, monarch vibe. He looks like his clothes are custom and he takes them to a dry cleaner to make sure they stay in pristine shape. Or, well, he gets the servants to do it. And he very carefully spreads his shirt open as wide as possible and then probably safety pins it into place to make sure his chest's always out. It gives a vibe of carefully constructed vanity and polish to his design. Contrast that with Scully, whose clothes are rough and shredded and uneven to convey more of a wild, animalistic type of sexy. I mean, he's literally a werewolf. These are the clothes he was probably wearing when he transformed, so they're getting ripped and stretched to fit that form and then ended up being revealing when he transformed back. The pants are low-rise to emphasize the V-line, the chest and arms show through the tattered shirt and leather vest, the fur around the collar emphasizes that wildness, and the tears in his pants show that even in his human form, he's still practically bursting out of his clothes. Nothing he's wearing is tailored, it's just what he has, you know? And then you've got Felix, who's a boxer. His base design is a lot cleaner and more simple than the other two, rejecting both the ostentatious extravagance of the monarch and the untamed wilderness of the werewolf in favor of a more clean-cut fighter. Even then though, we still see the low-rise shorts with a treasure trail and definition on the muscles to provide a bit of a tease, and in his alt design we can see how a few leather straps and a color change turn him into a muscular go-go boy. None of these are right or wrong. Rather, they're all right for the vibes they're each going for, even when they share a similar core body type. Body hair is also obviously part of this too. Look at Apollo Alto versus Ugoso Atsui. Apollo looks like he's waxed everything below his ears and oiled it up to show it off, which conveys a totally different vibe than Ugoso with very prominent patches of hair. He's also another werewolf, this time with some dragon mixed in, so in his fully human form he's smooth too. However, while Apollo's torso is oiled up and emphasizing the hairlessness even in places like the armpits, which communicates a lot more intentionality, Ugoso's is meant to create contrast between the human form and the transformed form, which has hair on the chest and arms as well as peeking out of his pants on the thighs and treasure trail. Both of these are sexualized, or at least sexualized elements of the character design, but with different end goals. The hair on Ugoso communicates raw masculinity and is emphasized with literal gold in the form of a ring on the chest and the belt buckle for the treasure trail to draw attention to them. Apollo, especially in these poses, is showing off that there's no hair at all. But while the assumption is that body hair is masculine and being smooth is feminine for a lot of people, I don't think you can look at Apollo and think, oh yeah, totally femme, like that's totally a feminine body. The muscles and pose still convey a masculine body type, so instead you get the vibe of showing off more, of wanting to catch the light with oiled up skin and be the center of attention, of wanting to make sure nobody misses a single muscle. Also, again, really gotta emphasize that this isn't just about getting men as naked as possible. It's also about opening up more diverse design options for male characters. Take Andrew, Garo, and Asher as examples here. Andrew's design sexualizes his character, but also incorporates cultural elements of his Vietnamese heritage in a way that's really cool. You know, you've got the mesh on the chest area, and off-the-shoulder top, and thigh highs with gold accents all conveying a lot about him and making his design really stand out. Contrast him with Asher, who has this harness that immediately changes the vibe of what he's wearing. Instead of just being a simple shirt, we're introducing leather and metal. We're drawing focus to the chest, and we're indicating a more slender body underneath the shirt with how the harness narrows as it moves down the torso. And all of it feels like something the character wants us to be thinking, which tells us a lot about him. Then we've got Garo, whose primary design is giving kind of what if streetwear but sexy. It gives the vibes of a club outfit or something you'd wear to a party with the mesh sleeves, thigh highs, short shorts, and street shoes all communicating that this is something that this character is likely wearing out to a social event. But it's a social event that they actually have to like get to, you know, and get back from. All three of them use sexualized aspects of their design to communicate more about who they are, but it also allows them to expand the range of clothing options for male characters if they're willing to incorporate more of that sexualization. It tells us more about them than it otherwise would. And of course, you can do a little or a lot with this. Ryza only has a single cutout on the chest, but it still does tell us something about the character given that he would otherwise be fully clothed from the neck down. Visago, by contrast, shows a bit more. The jacket is off the shoulder, the corset is open in the middle, the chest is exposed, there are rips in the front and the back, all that good stuff. But he's ultimately still pretty covered. You see enough to get what he's going for, but he's clearly not trying to emphasize that he's showing skin, or at least he's not trying to exclusively emphasize that he's showing skin. It's almost incidental to the way that he's dressed. Compare both of them to Mephisto and Kai Gloomfang, who are both wearing short shorts, crop tops, shoulders out, bicep length sleeves, and thigh highs. Kai also has some fishnet texture on one leg and the shoulders, while Mephisto relies on a more leather/latex looking material with a couple of thigh harnesses to boot. The degree to which you incorporate sexualized elements of a design tells us something about them. That's why I don't want every male character to be wearing the most revealing clothing possible. If Ryza and Visago both showed the same amount of skin as Mephisto and Kai, it wouldn't tell us anything about the four characters in relation to each other because then it's just the default. Having the contrast between them allows for there to be sexualization and for it to mean something. Lastly, since this section's already gone on for way too long, it's also important to acknowledge gender here, and gender presentation specifically. Sexualization is hard to fully separate from gender, as mentioned before, but that's not an inherently bad or limiting thing. Femininity in men can be sexy, and sexualized, just like how masculinity in women can be. Take Rinnan, whose design is super feminine in terms of colors, outfit, and more. We have the cutout on the back of the jacket and dress, as well as on the shoulders, we have the short shorts, we have the long boots, all that good stuff that still sexualizes the design. We slide a bit more to the mask side, and we might find Sleepy, who's got more of a femboy vibe going on. Big jacket worn off the shoulders, pants with the cutouts, long boots with the heel, the high-waisted pants that cinch in at the waist, and the top with the harness that emphasizes the chest all serve to sexualize the design. With nubs, it's especially helpful here because we can compare the old and new design. The old design silhouette is giving more of a dress, with the cutouts evoking more feminine design when compared to his newer 3D designs, baggy pants, open jacket, harness, and more. With Axel's design, we can see more mask elements like the baggy jeans, the thick belt, the chain, and stuff like that, but we also get those hip cutouts that add an extra layer to it without contradicting the overall vibe. And then, of course, I would argue the easiest way to go for a more traditional mask vibe is to incorporate men's formal wear, which Vesper's Frost does by using a suit vest corset with dress pants. The bottom of the vest just barely doesn't meet the top of the pants, teasing just a little bit of skin, while the cut of the entire outfit emphasizes his muscles and strength in pieces that are still unmistakably masculine. At this point, we've gone over a ton of different examples of how to sexualize a male character and what it can look like, which thank you again to everyone who submitted their designs to allow me to slut them out for a bit. But you might still be wondering why this should be done. Like, what's the actual reason, the justification for it? Part 5. But why? Some people would argue it's about equality. The adage of, I don't want the women to be more covered up, I want the men to look sluttier. Or even cover up the women, undress the men. That kind of approach that people take when talking about this stuff. However, I don't think that's the best argument here. Sexualizing every male character by default would just be as boring as sexualizing every female character by default. And even if women weren't being sexualized, I would still argue for incorporating more sexualized male character designs. That's not to say the contrast can't be interesting. Again, Voice of the Cards is a really good example of this, especially the first game, where the female characters are dressed in the way that men typically are, and the men are dressed more like how women typically are in these sorts of games. But part of why that worked is because it was an exception to the rule. I think it's more complicated than just trying to say, oh, well, we want to balance it out. We want it to be equal in this sense. Another argument that could be made would be for diversity in character designs. This opens up more options, and this is one that I'm more amenable to. I think I've demonstrated that there are a lot of options opened up when you make your men a bit more lewd, and that doesn't just appeal to people who are attracted to men. A lot of the counter argument towards this stuff is that it would turn off straight men, who are the presumed main audience of any game, but personally, I've never really understood that. Tons of straight women do enjoy the sexualized designs of female characters without any sexual attraction to them, in large part because it does feel cool to feel sexy and powerful. Obviously not just to give a pass to the over-sexualization of female characters in general, but you get what I mean, right? Straight men can enjoy that fantasy too. That's why the men in straight and not safe for work content of any kind are still going to be hot enough that it doesn't ruin the moment for them. Also, people who are attracted to men are still part of the gaming space, whether it's women, whether it's men, whether it's whoever. And it doesn't hurt straight men to throw just a little fan service our way too. There's literally no negative impact on you. However, I think the issue with all of this is that it assumes that there has to be a reason in the first place. What is the reason for why we should do X and not Y? What's the merit behind any character design element? When it comes to character design, where we draw the line on what is and is not on the table tells us something about who we are. Considering this stuff a priority for female character design and not even an option for male character design tells us something about who is not only being pandered to, but also who's being left out. And again, it also does leave out men if they aren't ever allowed to embrace a male Ivy Valentine or Evelyn type of vibe and express that part of themselves. Lots of men do have that inside them, so why leave them out? There are things that should be off the table, don't get it twisted. The most obvious would be the sexualization of children, which I don't think video games as a medium are really capable of addressing. There is media out there in the world that does grapple with the reality that children often are sexualized, both in fiction and in the real world, whether it's fictional stories about children who grow up being sexualized and exploited or real-world documentaries about it. But video games probably just aren't really the right one for something so sensitive. Danganronpa Ultra Despair Girls tries to tackle it both from the perspective of a child star who got sexualized and exploited and a grown man who's into children, and in both cases, it really is not done well. Hell, even if we go into Goodbye Despair, which is a pretty good Danganronpa game, there is a point that you can pretty easily miss because of a character who dies early, whose siblings, younger siblings specifically, are the ultimate male and female escorts. This is a character in high school, younger siblings, male and female escorts. Really not a good vibe, not being handled super well. Again, plenty of children are trafficked into that kind of scenario or exploited in that way, but I don't think that having it expressed by the character being jealous of how hot his younger siblings are is a good way of handling it at all. Drawing that line is valid, but importantly, we're not just drawing it arbitrarily. It's being done for a reason. By contrast, there's not really a reason for the sexualization of adult male characters to be off the table. And as this video has demonstrated, there are plenty of reasons to put it back on that table. And what's more, this video has demonstrated that it's not as simple as just making the men shirtless. Like, yeah, that new Iron Fist skin is sexy, but it is clearly not doing the same thing as the Emma Frost skin. Hell, my own design is more covered up than Iron Fist, but I would argue it's also a lot more sexualized with the cutouts on the thigh as well as the bodysuit. I think we've demonstrated how to sexualize a male character, but in general, I think there's a bigger argument about why. And in my opinion, the argument shouldn't be, why should we sexualize male characters? But rather, why shouldn't we? The onus should be on the opposition to prove the merits of arbitrarily deciding that male character designs shouldn't incorporate more sexualized elements by default, or at least just in general, like raise the average a bit. And they have not done that. It should be on the table because there's no reason for it not to be. There's no good reason why Johnny Storm isn't showing off his body a bit more when it would be entirely within his character to be a bit of a tease who wants to look hot. Like, he would absolutely be posing thirst traps, don't get it twisted. But there's also no good reason why Black Panther would wear a suit that would flatten his crotch to the extent that Trinity the Tuck would be jealous. Like, when we refuse to incorporate anything even remotely sexualized for male characters, we kind of just end up with characters who look wrong for who they are, and their bodies don't look right for what naturally would be there. In the same way that over-sexualizing female characters by default undermines characters that vibe doesn't fit. So yes, slut out the men. Let Johnny Storm wear a jockstrap. I rest my case.
Another epic victory! Big win!
Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video that was supposed to be a short one while I worked on some other videos, but I once again failed at writing anything concise. Sue me. Also, while you're doing that, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and consider becoming a channel member on YouTube or Patreon to support the content that I make. My channel members also get to pick one video per month for me to make, and for April, they chose Process of Elimination is Complicated and I Don't Know How to Talk About It, which I'm working on alongside the much older The Defensive V3 video that they selected back in October. It's coming along, I promise. It's getting there. I'm hoping it'll be out by probably not the end of April, but end of May for sure. I usually only do one poll per month, but for May I plan on doing 2 back-to-back since it's my birthday month, which would usually just be a donathon goal, but since I actually have a job now, I can't do what I've done in the past and just stream for like a month straight. I will, however, be doing some birthday streams on May 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th on Twitch if you want to come by and say hi. Anyways, the first poll will run from May 1st to midnight on May 10th between these 4 topics. Biting the wax. What happens when you fall for queerbaiting? This video would be about what queerbaiting is/isn't, what it means to fall for it, and how it affects our understanding of media even if we know that we're being queerbaited. Making the case for role queue. This video would be an attempt to make the case for role queue, both within the context of Overwatch's implementation of it and Marvel Rivals' decision not to follow suit. The content creator crisis of the commons. This video would explore how online content is in a uniquely modern crisis of the commons, and how that impacts the relationships between viewers, creators, content, and money. Elite beat agents and the games we lose to changing console gimmicks. This video would be about what happens to games and franchises that rely on a console's gimmick after that console generation ends and there's a new gimmick, using Elite Beat Agents as a jumping off point. The second poll will kick off immediately after the first one, running from the 11th to the 20th, with the second place topic from the first one coming back alongside 3 others. Mythical Pokemon were a bad idea that's only become worse with time. This video would be about a long-standing beef I have with Game Freak for creating a category of Pokemon that I, someone who grew up in rural Alberta, would literally never get to access legitimately, and why I think mythical Pokemon somehow managed to suck even more as a concept over time. What's the price of a game? This video would be about the discussion people are having about the price of Switch games, AAA games, indie games, all that stuff, focusing on what it means to even try to decide what the price of a game should be. Why Blizzard's cosmetic surveys are inherently flawed. This video would examine the fundamental flaws of Blizzard's approach to surveying the Overwatch community when it comes to understanding what they actually want, and what we can learn from this failure. If you want to vote in either of these polls, you can buy a membership on either Patreon or YouTube for $5 a month to vote in them both. The support means a lot to me, and is a big part of why I'm able to keep doing what I'm doing. However, that's not the only way that you can vote. Starting in May, there's going to be a couple of new test systems that we're trying out and seeing how they work. The first change that we're making is that you can now just buy the vote. Or not buy the vote, I guess, but you can buy the opportunity to vote as a one-time purchase on Patreon for $5, which is the same amount as the channel membership tier, instead of having to subscribe as a monthly member. So if you wanted to vote for one poll but didn't want to have to keep coming back to it, that would be the way to do it. The second is a horde vote. The horde is all of you. Everyone who watches the videos, everyone who's subscribed, everyone who just sees the post when it comes up. There will be a poll that's open to everyone to vote for those 4 topics for the given month, and collectively, you guys will cast one vote. Whichever topic you vote for the most is your first preference. The second place is second preference, and so on. And you will be voting alongside the channel members. I feel like this was a good way to give you guys at least a little bit of a say, but not override the members, you know? It felt like a good balance. It felt like it would make people a little bit more invested. Regardless, the support and involvement in all this stuff means a lot to me, and especially when it comes to channel memberships, it's a big part of why I'm able to keep doing what I'm doing. And speaking of, thank you to all of my channel members. At the $10 premium membership tier, thank you to Tortoise, and Jatanar, and a Ghostbat. At the $5 channel membership tier, thank you to Cage the Orc, Fish Toast, Mini Q, Alex Stone, Nemo the Survivor, Destiny, Cadence, Gavost, Marsh Alice, Crimson Cyclo, Good Guy Luis, Corey, MV, The Only Enigma, Mariah, Amon Dadley, Meep Cubed, Noisy Pitta, Harv, Marcy Gaskill, Deku _ Safon, Lala the Bambi, Monica Linnell, and JMD Toaster. Whether you're a channel member, a subscriber, or you just clicked on this video out of curiosity, thank you very much for watching, and I hope I'll see you around again soon.